So the next division to talk about in my draft grade series is the AFC South. And this is one of these divisions where, man, they are not good collectively as a group of four teams, right? They certainly weren't in 2024, but hope springs eternal and the draft can always bring new change. And, for this group overall, I can't point to anybody that I said did a terrible job. Everybody did average or better than average, So I like what I saw here. I'm going to start off with the Indianapolis Colts, though. You know, they're at a spot there at pick 14 where it doesn't make a ton of sense to move up. Kind of makes sense to say, like, hey, let's focus on getting somebody on that offense because if we're going to back one more time with Anthony Richardson, we got to get him more help. And they did that by drafting Tyler Warren, the tight end from Penn State. And, when you look at that draft position, when you look at what was available in this draft, it was probably the right pick for them, right? So I like the thought of, hey, we're running it back with AR-15. We got to help them a little bit more, and I feel like they did here. But then spending the next two picks on defensive talent, when you lost multiple offensive line starters like Freese and Kelly in free agency, was highly questionable to me. Now, Tumoalu, JT, the edge rusher from Ohio State. I'm sorry, it's early. It was a long night, so I'm not even going to try and butcher his last name. Did they need another edge rusher? They just took Latu last year at pick 15. Sure, you could always use more edge rushing talent, but was that the real priority, the real need here? And if we're going to say, well, it's best player available, yeah, bullshit. Sometimes you have areas you need to address that you must address. And as long as the board kind of lines up, that's where you need to force yourself to go here. Same thing with taking Justin Wally, the corner from Minnesota in round 3. He'll certainly contribute in nickel-dime situations right away, potentially be a starter. But it doesn't help Anthony Richardson. When you're getting into a real, show me kind of prove it year, you need him to have every opportunity to succeed. And your top 3 picks are a tight end. That makes sense to some degree. But it's an edge rusher and a corner. I don't really like that. You only invested 1 pick on the offensive line. That was Jalen Travis, the offensive tackle from Iowa State, in round 4. Yeah, not a huge fan of that. DJ Giddens in round 5, the running back from Kansas State, as a compliment to Jonathan Taylor in the backfield. Okay, cool. But it felt like to me the Colts kind of missed the memo a little bit about what their draft approach needed to be, which was around getting more help for Anthony Richardson. And they somewhat did that. They could have done a better job. So I give them a grade of a C here. Next up, I will talk about the Houston Texans. And this is a team that they didn't have the first round pick ultimately because they traded back, which kind of made sense. But they came into this draft with a clear need on the offensive line. So it was interesting to see that 2 of their first 3 picks were invested in Iowa State wide receivers. That was just weird quirk of things, right? They take Jaden Higgins at pick 34, and then at pick 79, they take Jalen Noel. It's interesting. The Texans in general took 3 Jalens in this draft. That's a popular fucking name, I guess, right? But you can say, hey, C.J. Stroud needs more weapons in that passing game because if Nico Collins is hurt and or Tank Dell is hurt, they really don't have much for C.J. Stroud to work with. So that is a priority here. And I would agree. It certainly was. It needed to be addressed at some point. I was just surprised that they addressed it twice that early. But I wouldn't knock them too much for it either, if that makes sense. I absolutely love them being able to trade back and get Ariante Ursary at pick 48. At this point in the draft, I thought along with Trapillo, they were about the only 2, give or take here. Maybe Charles Grant, who went from William & Mary late round 3 to the Raiders. Those are the guys I look at and I felt confident of. These guys can be future starters at offensive tackle in the league. And with trading away Laramie Tunsil, you had a big need at offensive tackle. I love the draft pick of Ursary. I thought that was the best pick of the weekend for them. Overall, I'm not sure that Woody Marks was the best running back on the board at pick 116 personally. But taking Jalen Smith and Jalen Reed to address your secondary, Jalen Smith probably contributes. I doubt Jalen Reed does much. I thought this was like a C to C plus kind of performance in the draft. Good news, they invested their first three picks on offense to build around C.J. Stroud, but I thought they could have done a little more to beef up that offensive line, in my opinion, and maybe it would have been worth a little bit earlier investing a pick in a running back and not waiting until round four and then perhaps reaching a little bit for Woody Marks. Next up, I'll go with the Jacksonville Jaguars, though. So the Texans, I gave them like a C, C plus. The Jacksonville Jaguars, though, I think this is a lot about the eye of the beholder, your perspective. I liked what they did. The Jaguars needed something different. They needed a culture guy. They needed a change the room kind of guy. And they went up and got him in Travis Hunter. Like, it's a really good young man, incredibly versatile athlete, screams future superstar. You know, choices and women aside, and no matter what he says, people are saying the things they say for a reason. Like, bro's gonna find out on his own someday. Sometimes you just gotta let folks find out, learn painful lessons. But in terms of, this is a guy that clearly works very hard, has a tremendous passion for the game, wanting to play both sides of the ball. And he was like a two-time academic All-American. So like, on a team last year that had several instances where they quit for one reason or another, you need this guy that will come out there and compete game in and game out. And now you're talking about, assuming it sounds like they're going to be starting him primarily at wide receiver under new head coach Liam Cohen. Now Trevor Lawrence comes into a team that has Brian Thomas on one side, Travis Hunter on the other side. That is really fucking exciting. And then if you're able to deploy him some in the secondary on nickel and dime, like obvious passing situations, like, you could get some tremendous value out of this pick. And you can say, well, man, to move up from 5-2, they gave up a first round pick next year. Yeah, they did, but it's not like it's very likely, even if they stink next year, they would be taking a quarterback because of the investment in resources they have committed to Trevor Lawrence. So they needed something now. Why not? Why the fuck not? And then when I look at what happened in like rounds 3 and 4, I thought it made it more justifiable for them to give away that first round pick next year. Caleb Ransaw from Tulane, they badly needed to address the secondary. They did that here. He'll start at some point in time. Wyatt Millum, the guard from West Virginia, I think he's a future, 8-year, 10-year starter in the league. And then in round 4, pick 104, they got one of the running backs I really coveted for the Bears in this draft, in Bashal Tutin from Virginia Tech. Great speed, sure, some concerns about durability and fumbling, but man, electric with the ball in his hands, underrated as a pass catcher. Virginia Tech did a terrible job of utilizing him. Exciting compliment potentially to Tank Bigsby in that backfield. And then Jack Kaiser, the linebacker from Notre Dame, outside chance that he could be a future starter. So I really like the Jaguars and their approach and their philosophy here, so I give them a grade of like a B-. But I think the biggest winner overall is the Tennessee Titans. They came into this draft badly needing a quarterback. They had pick 1. They drafted the only quarterback worth drafting that high in this draft, in my opinion, which was Cam Ward from Miami. Like, it was obvious for weeks that he was going to be the choice. He needed to be the choice. He had to be the choice. And props to the Titans for not overthinking it. They realized he was their guy, and they just went and fucking drafted him. I wasn't as big of a fan, and I think I even called them out as one of my biggest day 2 losers for what they did on day 2. And it wasn't so much about the players, because like Oladejo, the edge rusher from UCLA, that was about the right draft range for him. Kevin Winston, the safety from Penn State, round 3, pick 82, that was about the right draft range for them. Both of them are going to be starters for Tennessee, but you just drafted Cam Ward. You have plenty of other needs on that offense. Like, who's your dynamic running back? Who's your dynamic wide receiver? Who's your complement to Calvin Ridley at a minimum? Who's your tight end? Are you really good on the offensive line? Do you really need to be spending your next 2 picks on defense when you just drafted a quarterback, knowing that has to be the guy that you build around? Not so huge on that, right? But it seemed like they pivoted a little bit early on in day 4. They invested 3 picks in round 4, all on offensive skill players. Chimere Dike, the wide receiver from Florida, and then Gunnar Helm, the tight end from Texas, and then Alec Iomenor, the wide receiver from Stanford. Personally, I would have had Iomenor way above Dike in terms of the draft hierarchy, but, different teams have different perspectives. I do look at Gunnar Helm and say, like, I feel this is an example of a guy that could be a bit of a sleeper, and was a bit of a sleeper in this draft process, and does have the potential to be a future NFL starter as tight end. So if you're talking about in round 4, one of those 2 wide receivers contributes in a meaningful way, and then Gunnar Helm as a tight end contributes in a meaningful way, it all of a sudden makes this draft look a lot better, and it makes this draft not look so onerous for taking 2 defensive players in round 2 and round 3. So bottom line is, though, they took Cam Ward. They just got a lot better at quarterback than they had been the past couple of years with Mayonnaise Man at the helm. So for that alone, I give the Titans a grade of a B and say they were one of the winners of this year's draft because there was one potential franchise quarterback available in this draft, and they took him.